Time start
We
now.
can start now?
Yeah, we're past time.
All
Perfect, perfect.
Stephen, that's you.
Yeah, so awesome. Really appreciate everyone attending this session. I know there's a lot of AI talks and sessions out there, so we're going to try to make this as fun as possible, a little bit of interactivity. Really esteemed guests here to my right and left. Totally trump what I've done in the past. So Don and Stel, we'll do a few bios initially, talk about what we've done in the past, and then discuss a little bit of what we've done in our own companies or companies we've been affiliated with in terms of utilizing AI, and then basically open it up to some discussions with what you guys are really looking to hear from us, because 45 minutes is really, really short, and we want to get the most out to help you guys get the information that you're looking to obtain. So maybe, Don, if you want to start off with the bio.
Sure. So my name is Don Bora. I'm a 9-time co-founder. My current company that pays my bills is 8-Bit Studios. We're a custom dev shop in Chicago, Illinois. And since I've done 9 companies, I've had a few exits. I've shut a few companies down. A few of them are still alive. I like to keep busy, and I've seen pretty much like every part of the founder journey. So if you're starting companies, you can literally ask me anything. I won't shy away from anything. I've had HR, finance, tech reporting up to me, so I can talk about all that crazy stuff. And I've been in AI since the 90s, and I've just kind of been watching what's going on in AI. So I can tell you right now that a bunch of us in the industry did not see this coming. And we're all kind of like figuring out what's going on. So happy to talk about any of that stuff. And real quick, how many founders do we have in the room? How many first-time founders? And how many founders that are dealing with HR or AI? Okay, cool, okay.
Awesome. Stel?
Yeah, Don, I really want to know about real estate procurement because I think that's the future. And look at that, yeah. And I say that both joking and not necessarily joking because I'm an investor in an analytics company that does like real estate analytics to figure out where to get, real estate. There you go, we should talk. Anyway, so Stel Valavanis, I'm the CEO of onShore Security. And I have a few tech businesses under my belt, not 8, wow. Also including Dev Shop in the 90s where it was a little closer to some of the stuff Don done. So I did see a lot of startups in that stage. And then more recently as an investor doing fintech, some media, fun stuff. Not really so much AI, but I think kind of part of the talk here isn't so much about, hey, are you an AI business? It's kind of like in our generation, the discussion was, oh, are you a tech business? And then eventually it's kind of like, what isn't a tech business? And I think we're not too far off, decade, I don't know, of no longer saying what's an AI business because they're all AI businesses. Anyways, so other than that, I do run a small business incubator called The Gallery in Chicago, actually in Evanston, a suburb of Chicago by Northwestern University. Some affiliation with Northwestern, nothing formal. Honestly, there's a community in Chicago, and I'm certain that each of you, where you are from, can find your community of startups, technology businesses, whatnot. And I'm, very involved in the whole kind of sphere around Chicago, and a little bit in other communities here and there, like this. There you go.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll jump in really quickly. So Stephen Lee, originally trained as an eye doctor, so wasn't really in business at all. Jumped in kind of like fast and furious when I invented the first online eye exam. So this was 2009. Built a company called Alternative, rebranded as Visibly, and you'll see some of the stuff that I kind of pushed out because there's a lot of competitors and companies that have kind of used what I built out, like Warby Parker, 1-800-CONTACTS, and a few other companies like that. Left that company in 2019. COVID hit, world turned a little wild, and then jumped in as CEO of an e-com company called Vision Pros, and then quickly did a sale and got a few bids there, sold it to a public company called CloudMD, and ever since I've just been doing a few things, advising a number of different companies in both healthcare, legal tech, in a whole wide range of areas. but also have still been focused on innovation, and more recently have delved into the company Zenni Optical, one of the largest online eye care groups out there. So right now leading optical product there. One other thing that I'm also affiliated with is a company called SDS Capital, helping on the M&A side. So helping founders that really haven't taken in VC investment, that just want to see a transformative change in exit, really help them achieve that through strategic bids.
So Stephen gives us a lot of credit up here, but did you catch that? Invented the online eye exam. So I mean, come on.
It's not that big of a deal.
He does this all the time.
These two are like bigger deals than me.
We don't have PhDs. He's got a
Cut it
PhD.
out,
We don't have
man. Just go to the questions.
So yeah, let's dive into some examples about how we've used AI. So maybe Don, if you want to start off with that.
Yeah, it's funny. I just pinged my team yesterday because I didn't want to give them a chance to ignore me. So I'm like, hey, I'm on a plane right now. I need your answer to this question. So they all kind of wonderfully chimed in. My company's about 30 people. About tech team is about half the company. And we do have design and user experience, and I have not dove into what they're using AI for, but I was curious about the tech team because I think we hire for natural curiosity. That's the skill we hire for, and so I get a sense that they're all kind of tooling around with something. And what I've seen is pretty much what I expected to see. They're all using it in supplemental ways. So they're trying to use it maybe to how many tech people do we have in the room? I don't want to get too. Oh, okay, about half the room. Okay, cool. The other half can ask the people with their hands up what I'm talking about later. So they're using it to validate their tests or refactor their code or clean it up a little bit. What we're finding is we can't use it to write new code because CodePilot and ChatGPT CodePilot is based on ChatGPT and they're based on a learning model that's 4 years old. So in computer language terms, that's decades. And so I decided to do an experimentation where I wanted to use, I've got 30 years in tech, so there's not much that I haven't seen in this space. And so I'm like, all right, well, let's see if I can use it to help me write a mobile app in a language that I've never used before. And within a couple of hours, I was getting version problems. I was using a brand new version of the framework. ChatGPT didn't know about that new version, and it was 4 years old. And since this is new tech I was using, the language that I was using, 4 years is light years. So I ended up having to spend a couple of hours debugging everything I put in. So it's a mix right now. I'm fairly confident that we're going to figure out kind of like a good pace for what works, maybe test coverage, maybe very simple pull out some little bits of pieces of algorithms that we can refactor out. But I think that's probably where we're going. And I won't take up much more time. I'll say this. I think that the next thing that has to happen, and I've talked at length with these two about it, so they might fall asleep when I say this, but the next thing that has to happen, and these large language models that are being developed, they take an enormous amount of compute power, enormous amount of energy to generate. And so when they do, they lock it in, and then it's immediately 4 years old. Right now, that's kind of the metric, 3 or 4 years old. So what's got to happen is we've got to have this continuous large language model generation. That is a mathematical problem. I don't think it's going to be solved with compute rather. I don't think you can throw more hardware at this. I think it's going to be somebody is going to be able to math this out and figure out how to make this a continuous thing so we can index the billions of things that are being added to the internet every day.
Awesome. What about you, Stel?
Speaking of indexing the billions of things that are happening on the internet, so my company, onShore Security, our primary service is what's called MDR, Managed Detection and Response, which is think of it as we actually have a brand name for our platform. We call it Panoptic, means seeing all. So it's about ingesting lots of very disparate security data. Don't assume that all these fancy vendors out there do something to make that necessarily easy for you. You have to normalize the data yourself, et cetera. And we use a lot of big data tools. We really hitched a ride on a company called Elastic. If you haven't heard of them, check it out. It's a big data analytic tool. And we're drinking from a fire hose. And years ago, the very beginnings of machine learning clusters we put in place were useful. Today, it's way more advanced. We definitely don't have a, oh, you're going to tell us when something's wrong. No, it's not at all like that. It's much more of a help to the analyst and to the person tuning the systems. We still have to tell the AI, and my CTO says, please don't use the term AI, so that we're way past that. ML, machine learning. We have to tell it what we think of the responses, what we think of the, the modeling. And we used to do things like, let me give you an example. Gee, we're seeing, this, lumpiness in traffic coming from a particular server, a particular application. How different is it from the day before or the month before? Or how do we index that so we can compare it over a larger set of data? We normally keep 12 months of data, but that's a lot of data to look at for even one server. We're not talking about billions, we're talking about trillions, we're talking about petabytes of data. And so when we would look at that and create profiles for those, we'd use search tools. Elastic has great search engine tools, whatnot. And you start to kind of reduce the problem. Now, with our ML clusters, they recommend tunings for that. They recommend a rule to apply. They recommend, and when I say like a threshold, let's say for some activity coming from a particular device, that is not a simple yes, no, black, white. It's a very complex set of things like users, time of day, compared to other traffic happening in other places, correlating with authentication, whatnot, stuff that is just not humanly possible. So now we're creating models that it's not just like a human doesn't do that well. It's just there's absolutely no way a human could do it. And so we get this rich, complex model that is a profile for a particular node on the network, and there's a human saying, let's test that. Makes sense. I see where that rule applies, doesn't apply. Tune it, adjust it, bake it in. That's what we're seeing. It's kind of like the AI is training us rather than us training the AI, which is, weird that flip would happen, and finally, what's that magnetic game that would just finally would flip over? Yeah. So we're kind of in that space, but not exactly this kind of interactive thing that you're seeing with something like ChatGPT. I do have one example, though, of that is one of my companies I've invested in, a fintech company. They have been using, they say successfully, ChatGPT for testing their code, looking for bugs. Though I got to challenge them with this, like, hey, it's 4-year-old language, and it's on iOS too, so I think it's relevant. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, there's in going forward, I would say, admittedly for us, like we do develop our platform, but the component tools we rely on heavily the open source world and Elastic, like I mentioned, and so to some extent we're more users than developers of AI. But remember, like here we just said, Don just posed a big problem, like, oh, going forward, we're gonna all he didn't say, necessarily write better code or whatever. I guess a little bit with this saying like mathematically we can do something better, but the consumption of resources, the carbon footprint, kind of et cetera, that's the kind of activity that we're seeing going forward. And so, right now we're already in that phase of like, how are we using these tools? How do we use them better? How do we, make them more useful to us in a sustainable way? That's a pretty mature kind of context to be coming from. So we're talking about the future of AI. It's here. Basically, is what I'm saying. It's here. We're using it every day.
Awesome, Stel. Really good examples all around. And I'll jump in just with a few quick examples myself. And like I said, so I've advised a number of different companies in different verticals. One example I'll give you is in legal tech. And so yeah, you all may have seen some of the articles about issues with legal. There's one case where an attorney was using ChatGPT, wrote a rebuttal for a case, didn't validate the sources, and GPT, one of the problems with GPT, especially GPT 3 versus 4, is there's this term called like hallucinations, or just it makes up data to make it sound like there's like a good response. And if you don't validate, you get this example is a perfect example where you get in a lot of trouble. And so I'll give you the example of like the situation of the law firm I'm helping advise. So they're using it as a way to do some quick research, and I've been a stickler in saying, hey, you just got to validate. You can't just rely on this solely saying, hey, this is like 50 different sources. The sources, have X, Y, and Z arguments, if you don't have a human actually looking at that, you can be in a lot of trouble, like that previous case that just came out. So I think you can use AI really well to do some quick searches. Always have that segmentation of like just thinking, hey, is this all valid? Because if it's not valid, it looks even worse than you not even coming up with examples or cases, especially in law. I mean, when you're going in front of a judge and the judge is saying, hey, why does this not even exist out there in the real world? So that's an example in law. In terms of medical, I've seen it being used pretty well in terms of providing some guidance for physicians. So not basically saying, hey, we're going to replace the physician, here's the diagnoses, but more so, here's some examples of like where you could be recommending or some proposals on some treatment plans. So a way to help physicians, especially physicians that are really, really busy and they have a massive caseload trying to get through all their case files. So a way to just help the physicians work a little more efficiently. But same caveat, always just validate, make sure that the assumptions are correct and that it's the most recent data. One of the problems, like we've all been kind of discussing also, is the time frame of the data. Beginning of time till, if you cut it off till 2021, you have that gap. And I know right now that there's work being built on that, but that's the other piece. You're using older data, especially with medical, when there's new studies that are coming out that allow you to do better treatments. Just keeping on the up and up and making sure that you also understand that, not relying solely on the algorithms. And last example I'll give is chat systems, so chatbots. I've seen that implemented very well, supplementing the work of a customer service team. So instead of a team of just 10, you might have a team of 3 to 4 that are working alongside the chatbots or the AI bots that are helping to ask and analyze different questions and figuring out, what can you do to help the customer / patient, depending on what you're offering. I know Freshdesk was offering this even before GPT got really famous and popular, but right now things are getting even more advanced, and you're able to really dive down and help customers even more than you normally would. So just some examples that I've come across.
Well, something you said just reminded me. So I see about 100 startups a year. I mentor, I teach, and so through that activity, I see a number of them, and more AI is becoming kind of a table stakes across the board. So in user research, in persona development, in customer journey development. And in fact, I had an entrepreneur recently tell me that she had conducted 30 interviews, and then she used ChatGPT and posed the same questions to the chat, and it came back with pretty much the same thing that her 30 interviews had given her. Now, she's going to have to validate that. I mean, at some point, there's 2 problems there, right? Number one is, if you're asking chat for research, you're asking ChatGPT for research, all I'm telling entrepreneurs right now is to include the statement, give me links or give me reference links. Because at least then you can look up and validate your own data. And the second thing is that I tell people is if you're going to use ChatGPT generated artifacts for a pitch deck or for any kind of like case study arguments that you're going to be making while you're pitching to investors, you're probably going to want to disclose that at some point. Because I'm seeing a world where fraud is going to come into this at some level, where an investor is going to say, hey, that's not real, and you're going to say, well, I got that off a chat. And it doesn't matter, the accountability lies with you, the person asking for money. So those are just 2 examples that came to mind when you were talking.
Great comments there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be maturation in that space. It really answers a lot of the questions, even for like Copilot. If there's the argument now about, hey, I put my open source code out there, and now Copilot's using it and making money off of it. Well, how about software bill of materials? How about references to where the codes learned from? Actually, the company I think is if they are hearing this and they haven't thought of this already, shame on them. Get busy. These online image databases like Getty or what's the one that we use? Like Big Stock. I don't know if you guys know about that. You can go buy stock photos, let's say. I think that's kind of eliminates that whole problem of what's the source and copyright and intellectual property, whatever, because they already have their set of intellectual property. They could train on their content, and their creators can, have their work monetized very reasonably with algorithms, because the whatever produced, please give me a squirrel in a tree, I don't know, whatever, jumping upside down. And it does that, and it's used source material to do that. If the source material is contained, it's all big stocks images, it's all Getty's images. They know, who owns those, what their deal is with those people. They can kind of solve, at least in those cases, solve that problem. I think that's, to your point about, let's say, legal use, the references, and the bot can do it awesome. That's something they could do probably with, consistent accuracy. So, yeah.
True. Awesome. So what do you guys think? Let's open up the floor. Any questions that you guys would love us to dive into?
Problems we want to solve.
Yeah.
We're white middle-aged men, remember.
One of us. Two out of three of us are.
2 out of 3.
Oh, Mike, sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, so we didn't want to, one of the things we were talking about earlier is that we didn't want to bore the heck out of you, so we just want to establish some credibility, give you kind of a landmark of where we are, and open the floor up to see if you all had any questions. Where are you in your journey right now? If you're thinking about using AI, if you're thinking about, is AI going to take over the world? Like, these are questions we think we can give you our viewpoint on. Yeah. Sorry.
Microphone, look at that.
This is a practical application of AI. So for myself, I'm starting a business that requires access to particular data that I want to be able to analyze to produce a certain result. So I'm just not sure where to start in that realm. Can you speak to, hey, if we have an idea of a certain business that needs access to certain data, I don't know if these Copilot or others that are out there available to pull certain data, or if it's just dependent on everything that's on the internet 4 years ago, or how does someone get more specific and get access to that data, and what are the tools out there that we can do that?
I have a take on this.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm not sure I understood the question, to be honest with you, but also.
So there's a few things come in mind when you talk about what you're doing. The first thing is, when we looked at our business and when we looked at leveraging AI, it's for something as simple as case studies. We realized that we'd have to give a third party privileged information about our clients. And I think that's something of what you're talking about. That kind of stopped us cold, and it made me start looking at privacy policies. So right now, I'm sure you're feeling the same way I am. Like, I can't wake up without seeing 10 new AI-based SaaS products out there. Every single day, there's more and more coming out. I think that eventually they're going to have to start differentiating themselves on what they're doing with your data. So OpenAI has been very upfront about the fact that they're storing your prompts to somehow integrate in their model. But between ChatGPT and I can't remember Google's latest. What's it called? No, it wasn't Bard. It's their, what's it? Palm. That's right. Thank you. Yeah. So the latest version of Palm came out, and they're both black boxes, meaning that we don't know how nobody can tell you how they're arriving at their results, and that's a big problem for when you're trying to do what you're trying to do. So one of the things that we're looking into as a company is running our own version of an open source learning model locally on a server to see what we can throw into that. We haven't gotten very far yet, but I think that's kind of the area that you're getting into. And also just like looking at those privacy policies. Mm-hmm. And it's problematic, right? Because the first time I tried this, I tried to do a case study, some kind of case study analysis with a Google Drive integrated AI tool. And the AI tool said its privacy policy was a bit ambiguous. So I reached out to the developer and said, hey, developer to developer, what's going on? Are you storing this information? Tell me how you're using it. And the developer basically spat back the exact privacy policy in the email. I was like, well, okay, that's not very helpful. So, when I went in, I installed it anyway. And when I installed it, I realized the permissions it was asking me for wasn't going to allow it to access the Google Docs that I had in my permission. That's me as a developer. Like, I know what I'm looking at. The average research person may not know that, depending on how tech savvy they are. So it's a question of like understanding those privacy policies and making contact with those teams and seeing who can let you play there privately. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, in part.
In part?
Is it your data? I wasn't clear. That you have a set of data.
It's client, well, it's industry, like you were talking about legal tech, right?
Yeah.
And there's ethics around, the information that's being
Yeah,
accessed.
yeah, and liability. Yeah.
And liability.
Yeah.
So what I'm looking at is, I need access to industry-specific data to be able to analyze those organizations within that industry.
Publicly accessible, publicly available data, like
Yeah.
okay, go on.
Publicly
Yeah.
available data.
I
But
was-
it's very specific, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure, what
Okay.
tool sets are available to be able to get into that. So you're isolating what you're actually researching and what data you're pulling from that becomes more useful than just.
Yeah, it's that's
yeah.
a tough problem. I was just talking to a VP of tech at ExxonMobil last week, and he came up with the exact same problem. He's like, I was trying to generate a report, and I needed some data based on our metrics, like Exxon's metrics in a certain energy sector, and it gave him metrics from 2018. And he's like, I really need current metrics. And the chat said, I can't do that. So you're really at the mercy of whatever these tools are providing, unless you spin up your own tool.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Yeah, and so, well, it may or may not be. So
There's open source.
My director of tech told me that he used ChatGPT to write a Python script to do web scraping. Huh. Okay. So if the data is out there and you can point it to certain websites and you can scrape the info and then have some kind of a local engine munch on that.
Yeah. So
40 hours.
Totally.
Elasticsearch,
Awesome.
there's an open source fork of it, and there's lots of stuff out there. It's Snowflake's commercial. I think Hadoop is there's an open source Hadoop, isn't there? Anyways,
I think so,
but yeah, there's some big. You got to look for a tool that does big data, and really all that really means is that it handles unstructured data well. So you can do your own kind of indexing, normalizing on top of a bunch of disparate data. But you could run it yourself. Completely open source, Elastic. If you have some good Linux admin that could fire that up. There's pretty cheap hosting. Amazon has their OpenSearch, which is a fork. I will always recommend Elastic's official, and they have their cloud service doing that, and their enterprise version. And for the size of data you're talking about, it sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much. It's not going to be terribly expensive, but you can do literally free. And now sucking in the data, then you got to do what Don said, so you can suck in that OSINT. But the big data tools really help you make that disparate data come together, because it's unnormalized. It's just all different random bits. You'd be amazed how good these tools are at making sense of it, of creating a model. And you're using ML doing that, because they've built modeling tools based on ML. In other words, let me find a pattern in this, having learned from all the ways I found patterns in other messy chunks of data. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
There was somebody over here, and then
Sorry.
right after that.
Yeah.
Somebody's hidden.
With ChatGPT, DALL-E, and everything, lowering the barrier to entry to generate content, scripts, and everything, how do you create a moat to defend your business, and how do you pitch that to investors that you have a solid business?
How do you create a moat?
Yeah, how would you create a moat to defend your business? And investors also look at that to say, can somebody else come in and displace you in 3 days?
Yeah, always, right?
Move fast.
I'll jump in really quickly. So I think that that's a concern for a lot of folks initially, but I would say the biggest moat really is execution, because most people can't execute well. And so the way I kind of look at GPT and some of these other tools that you mentioned, it provides the founder that's not super technical. Not to say that you don't need an understanding.
Go with it.
Yeah, it's totally helpful
Yeah.
if you know some of the tech pieces, but it allows a founder that's creative, has ideas, to really create that initial MVP versus, I'm thinking back 5 to 8 years ago, it was really, really tough. You'd have to raise, what I had to do, I had to raise over $2 million initially for my first startup just to build a prototype, but now you really don't need that. I mean, you can build that prototype really quick, fast and furious. get that off the ground, and just think of it this way. There's this one saying where people kind of get really concerned, saying, hey, I got to sign NDAs. I don't want to tell you about my idea because you're going to steal it. Most of the time, it's like 99.9999% of the time, no one's going to steal that idea because it takes so much blood, sweat, and tears to actually execute on an idea, and people don't want to go through the ups and downs that founders do. And so it's the execution that really separates you from the tranche. I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's all about you as well. Like when you're going and raising money from an investor, it's like, who are you? The investor's taking a bet on you. Most investors that are really good will say, hey, I trust in you. I know that you're going to take the bets that need to be made. You're going to also climb out of the trenches when need be, versus someone else that's just going to give up. I think that's the difference between like a really good investor that sees a founder and says, hey, I'm going to bet on you, versus like just someone that's going to say like, hey, I need everything just perfect, with a ribbon and bow on there.
Yeah. There's so many more triggers than the moat. I mean, if you have an IP-based startup, yeah, great. That's big feather in your cap. But if you don't, you don't. And so so you look for other moats. You should look for them. Right. But I'll throw in too, though. You really got to be attractive to that investor in a whole bunch of ways. I do think Steven's number one is that execution. You look a year into somebody's working on something versus a year somebody else working on something. They prove they can execute. And that's way better than me stealing your great or dumb idea and finding a team and hiring offshore developers or whatever and trying to do it. And there's no guarantee of success. So that even partial success or that early sign of success that's a moat in itself. That's the moat. It's like, wow, these guys can do it. I don't know what it was, magic, but they could do it. The other thing I would add in, the pepper on top, is really important is kind of like when you're doing sales, know your customer, really understand what their demand is. Think of raising money as selling, and know what they want. What are they investing before? Know who your exit potential, potential companies are. Like, are you going to eventually sell to somebody? Then target your work towards that, and kind of there's a moat because you might do something a little different than somebody else would, and you put a lot of effort there, and you just look right at the right time. So.
I have nothing to add.
Oh.
Hi, guys.
Oh.
I couldn't have laid that up even better, actually, because my question is actually around the execution. It's one of the things that I see with a lot of people that I work with is how can you leverage AI to do some of that execution and that sales and support your customer journey along the way. And I've seen a lot of those tools, yes, good on some of the chat stuff, but those only work if you've got a really good knowledge base underneath them. So how do you create or leverage AI to do things like sales plays and find your ideal customer profile and then get you lists and stuff like that? Because that data, I think, there is still that gap, but I think that's an area that could really help leverage the execution side of it. How are we leveraging artificial intelligence or machine learning to really help us with that execution side?
So execution on the sales side?
Sales, specifically, commercialization.
And I think that really applies to any operational methodology you want to put in place. And it's funny you mention that because I'm on the cusp of doing this myself for sales. Part of me, so there's been so much research done on any of these operational topics. So many books written, so many experts, TED Talks and whatnot. And I think there's enough in the ecosystem that any reinvention is going to take place at the local level, meaning you as a founder. And I personally would start using these AI tools to pull together and to find the overlap of all these methodologies and start to explain them, dumb them down for me. Really explain this in plain language to me. And then I would start to pick apart, okay, well, I think this would work for me, and I think this would work for me. And then I would take what works for me, and I would feed that back into the chat and say, generate a strategy for me on this, and just to see where it takes you. Because even if it's if it's completely worthless, you'll get something out of it. You'll come away with, aha, okay, I get this now. And I think part of the power of failure is knowing what you don't want to do. And man, nothing gets you there quicker than a false answer.
Hi guys, thanks very much for being here. My name is Gavin Harrison. We're in the leader tech space, and I'm wondering what advice you'd offer when you've got a successful MVP. It's built using the OpenAI API, and we're wondering what point does that become your Achilles heel as you start to scale up?
I think you should do that.
All right,
Yeah.
yeah, I do have opinions on this. I'll turn so I don't screw the microphone
the
up. I've been
developer side.
instructed on what not to do. So, yeah, whenever you kind of rely on these off-platform tools, you've got that single point of failure that can take your business down. It used to be Facebook login. Now it's Google login or Apple login or whatever. And all these companies are kind of forcing you to do certain things when you use their tech. I don't think I have a good answer for you. I think I have a lot of good concerns for you. I think I will just say you're not alone. These are valid concerns. We only have 5 minutes left. That's scary. I'd be happy to talk to you. It's a valid concern and just something to keep in mind as you move forward and try to figure out, as Stel pointed out earlier, like what other things are you doing that separate you from your competitors? 5 minutes, really?
I would also look at any in general, like any part of the ecosystem you're going to use, understand their incentives. Are they going to go vertical or are they going to go horizontal? I mean, they're going to eat somebody's lunch, but if you want to avoid your lunch getting eaten, try to identify where their strongest incentives are. Yeah. And if there are other peers in there with you that you can fight with together with Congress, I don't know, whatever. You gotta,
5 minutes left. What do you want to see us do?
Any other questions quickly?
Yes, I have something I wanted to just add here. Yeah, I come from the stock market background, so that's what we do. We run a deep tech, which builds index funds, and how we look at information is not how the world sees AI with information, because we look at AI as new information, which is kind of more garbage into the system. And the reason I say this is because there's so many people trying to fit AI into their system. They don't have a clue about what information is in the first place. And information in the stock market context does not work because your pension funds have no clue how to make money for you. The reason being that 90% of active money does not beat the market, which means that information where it has to be used best in stock market does not have a clue about what to do with AI. So what I'm kind of making an opinion here is that information is the real innovation first before we apply AI. And information is not looked outside content. It has to be contextualized before we even think about AI. What are your thoughts on this?
Wow, that was a brilliant way to end. That was awesome. I would say that I come from a bit of a financial background as well, and finance is still the land of high mathematics and physics. It always will be. It's just applying formula to ever-changing data sets, rapidly changing data sets. So, I don't know what role AI has to play in that realm, but in fintech in general, I mean, it's kind of like how you use the tool to get information, to coalesce and condense information.
My take, because I've chatted with a lot of different folks in the fintech space that have dealt with real-time trading, and folks that have built their careers initially in that realm, and so have kind of picked their brains and heard their different thoughts on this. I think the value or the area where it becomes really interesting is when AI is able to really deduce information that's correct without just making up information. Then you can accumulate a lot of different pieces of data from social media, different opinions from maybe thoughts of individuals that are working inside a company, because that can really help you deduce, like, how is the company really doing? And it's not even private information. It's like people are just talking amongst like how they're feeling, and that can really give you a leverage point on direction a company is going. And basically what I'm just trying to say is, like, there's different variables that you can be pulling in from different sources, but I think the key thing really is true points of knowledge rather than just made up information. anything still.
One of our customers who's in the cryptocurrency space asked us to ingest a Twitter feeds so that so we can do some, let's say, analysis of the chatter to make some predictions on, I'm not sure ultimately what, but how much they mine or who they play with, whatnot, and also look for bad actors, things like that. That's a pretty tough problem because it's just a lot of different disparate data, and I think financial data is actually a lot like that. There's a lot of whatever hundreds of millions of actors, all independent, and coming at it with all kinds of different information about something on a news article or something. How do you normalize that stuff? I actually think the AI kind of direction we're going in now is going to nail that. I really think it's going to be able to create context. And in the financial world, it'll be even more powerful because in the financial world, unlike many other spaces, and I see this in cryptocurrency, so that's financial, that is that there's a feedback loop. It's a mirror and a creator. What you do when you trade is you don't just trade out of the box, out of context. You affect that ecosystem that you traded in. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, I think we're out of time. Really
Yeah.
appreciate you guys joining the session, and hope we provided some good guidance for you all. I think all the three of us are happy to chat with you all in the future, and I think our contact information is in the pamphlet as well.